support in Indian Wells. Look at this. I mean, this was in Australia. Court 6 literally had a line. I know I'm exaggerating, but it went for miles at the Aussie. It was wild scenes there. Allie, can you remember a women's star who gets this type of support wherever she goes?
Yeah, well, Taylor Swift? I mean...
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, for sure.
A 21-year-old from the Philippines is doing something that world number ones and Grand Slam champions apparently cannot. She is filling stadiums, breaking the internet, and making tournament organizers sweat over crowd logistics. Experts are now publicly asking whether she is the biggest draw in women's tennis. Not the best player, the biggest draw. Those are very different conversations. Do you think Eala is already the most exciting name in women's tennis right now? Regardless of ranking, drop your answer in the comments. Genuinely curious where people stand on this.
You know, I'd have to say maybe a little bit of Sania Mirza. Back in her heyday, obviously the Indian fans took to her and they followed her all around the globe, obviously not to this extent. And I think the ceiling that Eala has is obviously that much higher. And I'm gonna bring in a little boxing here because my dad wanted me to be a boxer, but I chose tennis. But Manny Pacquiao.
Good call.
Manny Pacquiao, we saw him when he, was at the top of his game. And alongside Roger Federer, he actually had more prize money. So I think that if Eala, can keep doing well with her tennis, who knows? The sky's the limit on the court, off the court. I mean, she could be rolling in it, if you will.
Yeah.
Let's start with a number that has no business being real. Eala's pre-tournament press conference at the 2026 Australian Open pulled 171,000 views. Novak Djokovic has pulled 80,000. Aryna Sabalenka's pulled 9,000. Read that again slowly if you need to. The world number 1 women's player, a multi-Grand Slam champion who dominates matches with the kind of power that makes opponents look like they showed up to the wrong event, drew 9,000 views to her press conference. Eala drew nearly 20 times that. And nobody in the tennis world is pretending that's a normal statistic.
She's got a smile that lights up a room, too, and I remember last year when she beat Iga Świątek, and she kind of did it with a lot of grace and humility, and it was really, for me, it was terrific to see her take that match and watch her play after that and watch her try to continue to progress, because I like her game. Obviously, she wants to get better than where she is now, than 32 in the world, but she's got a lot of good hand-eye coordination and ability to take the ball early and redirect. But the fan stuff is always fun for me, because whenever you see players from smaller countries, the fans are so passionate when they get up to the top.
It's interesting, Ali mentioned Sania Mirza. She has nearly 13 million followers on Instagram. That's 5 million more than Carlos Alcaraz, and nearly as many as Alcaraz and Sabalenka combined. So that's how big Sania Mirza was, and will be. But Eala going to be seeded for the first time at a 1,000. To find out who she will play in the second round, check out the draw.
This is what the expert conversation around Eala looks like in 2026. Not careful, not measured, not the usual diplomatic tennis media language where everyone is described as a great competitor with a bright future. The conversation has moved past that. Former ADP players Sam Querrey and Steve Johnson sat down recently and asked a question out loud that a lot of people in the sport have been quietly thinking. Is Eala the biggest draw in women's tennis right now? Johnson's answer was yes. Not maybe, not she's getting there. Yes. That answer deserves some unpacking, because biggest draw is a specific term. It doesn't mean best player. It doesn't mean highest ranked. It means who puts people in seats, who crashes online servers, who makes organizers nervous about crowd management before a match even starts. And on that specific question in 2026, the case for Eala is genuinely difficult to argue against. Let's go back to Australia, because that's where this current wave of expert attention really started to build. The scenes at the Australian Open around Eala's matches were described as wild by the people covering them. Lines that seemed to stretch unreasonably far. Crowds that had no logical explanation based on ranking alone. A player ranked outside the top 30 at the time, generating the kind of pre-match atmosphere that Grand Slam organizers usually associate with top seeds in quarterfinals. The Filipino fan presence was enormous, and it was loud, and it was organized in a way that felt less like a tennis crowd and more like a concert turnout. For context, this is not a new phenomenon with players from passionate nations. But the scale of it with Eala is something that even experienced tennis voices are struggling to fit inside existing comparisons. When asked which women's star gets this kind of traveling support wherever she goes, one analyst went to Sonia Mesa, which is actually a serious comparison. MSA had Indian fans following her across the globe at the peak of her career, and her Instagram following sits at nearly 13 million today, about 5 million more than Carlos Alcaraz, and almost as many as Alcaraz and Sabalenka combined. That is what genuine cross-sport cultural influence looks like in tennis, and the experts are now saying ceiling is higher. Someone else in that conversation went to Manny Pacquiao, which tells you everything about the frame of reference being used. Pacquiao at his peak was one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. His fights were national events in the Philippines. The entire country reorganized around his schedule. At his commercial peak, he was reportedly earning alongside Roger Federer in terms of overall prize money and endorsement income. When tennis analysts start reaching for Manny Pacquiao as the closest comparison they can find, the conversation has officially left the usual territory. And to be clear, these aren't fans making these comparisons. These are former professional players and analysts who have spent careers watching the sport and trying to stay measured about it. Now, let's talk about what is actually driving this, because the fan support doesn't come from nowhere, and it's not purely emotional. There is a specific combination of factors at work with Eala that is creating something the sport hasn't quite seen in this exact form before. First, the story itself is unusually compelling. Eala trained at the Rafa Nadal Academy. She grew up away from home, developing her game in Spain under one of the most intense competitive environments in tennis. She came up through the junior ranks, won junior Grand Slam titles, and then began the grinding process of converting junior success into professional results on the main tour, which, as any tennis fan knows, is where most junior champions quietly disappear. The pipeline from junior star to legitimate WTA presence is brutal, and the majority don't make it through with their promise intact. Eala made it through, and she did it in a way that resonated deeply with a fan base that was watching and waiting. When she beat Tate, the reigning world #1 at the time, it was the kind of result that recalibrates how people see a player. Not just because of who she beat, but because of how she handled it afterward. The grace, the composure, the humility in the moment that said she understood what she had done without needing to perform a reaction for the cameras. That kind of behavior gets remembered. It builds a specific kind of loyalty that is hard to manufacture. Second, the market she represents is enormous and largely untapped by tennis. Southeast Asia is one of the fastest growing sports consumption regions on the planet. Digital penetration, social media engagement, and appetite for live sports content across the Philippines and the surrounding region represent a commercial opportunity that global sports organizations have been trying to figure out how to access for years. Eala doesn't just appeal to that market. She is that market in a very visible and personal way. When a Filipino fan tunes in to watch her play, or travels across a continent to watch her at a Grand Slam, or refreshes a website repeatedly until the stream loads, there is something happening beyond sports appreciation. It's cultural representation at the highest level of an individual sport. It's seeing someone who looks like you and comes from where you come from competing on the biggest stages in the world. That emotional engine doesn't run on rankings. It runs on identity. And in 2020 SIXS sports marketing and media landscape, identity moves faster than almost anything else. Third, her actual tennis is good. This part matters because influence without performance is a short story. Eala has real technical quality. The hand-eye coordination is exceptional. Her ability to take the ball early and redirect it to change the geometry of a point before an opponent has time to reset is something coaches have pointed to as a genuine weapon. It's not just flashy, it's structurally effective. It creates problems that players ranked above her have struggled to solve. She entered 2026 with momentum, went deep in Dubai, and rose 16 spots in the rankings to reach a career high of number 31 in late February. She's heading into Indian Wells, one of the biggest combined events on the calendar, with a first-round bye because of that ranking. And she arrives with a 106 season record, which is a number that tells you she's competing, winning, and building. This is not a viral story about a player who is popular on social media but struggles on court. The on-court results are moving in the right direction, and the timing of that movement has aligned with the surge in public attention in a way that is reinforcing both. Now, here's where the situation gets genuinely interesting from a business and structural standpoint. Tournament directors in the Middle East and Southeast Asia have been openly comparing her drawing power to Manny Pacquiao. Novak Djokovic, who has seen everything in this sport and is not easily impressed by anything, has called the surge around her a good problem for tennis. When Djokovic describes your fan base as a good problem for the sport, you have entered a different category of athlete entirely. The attendance patterns are already creating logistical headaches. crowds for her matches that exceed what the venue infrastructure was expecting. Organizers dealing with situations they didn't anticipate because a player ranked outside the top 30 is generating demand that belongs in a different tier. Indian Wells is next, and the expectation from people tracking these things is that Filipino fan support will show up in force. The comparison that keeps coming up, and it's worth sitting with, is to what Sonia Mara represented for Indian tennis globally. MRSA created a template for how a player from a non-traditional tennis market could build a following that crossed borders and outlasted their active career. Her 13 million Instagram followers exist not because she was the best player of her generation, but because she meant something beyond tennis to an enormous and passionate community. She was a cultural figure who happened to play tennis at an elite level. The analysts are now saying Eala's ceiling on that dimension is higher. Not cautiously, not with heavy qualification, higher. And the numbers currently support that framing. A press conference pulling 171,000 views against Djokovic's 80,000 is not a fluke. That is an audience telling you something clear about who they came to see. There is also the social media reality to address, because that's where the younger audience, the one that will define the sports commercial landscape for the next 2 decades, is making its decisions about who to follow. Eala belongs to the generation that is native to this environment. Short video content, real-time engagement, behind-the-scenes access, the kind of platform presence that turns a sports moment into a shareable cultural event. Her wins circulate. Her personality comes through in interviews in a way that translates to screen. She has a smile, as one analyst put it with complete sincerity, that lights up a room, which sounds like a throwaway compliment. But in the attention economy of modern sports media, warmth and charisma are not minor assets. They are the difference between viral moments and content that disappears. Coco Gauff built the template in recent years for what a young women's player with genuine mainstream crossover appeal can look like. The commercial opportunities, the cultural visibility, the ability to reach audiences that don't usually watch tennis. Eala, according to several analysts tracking this in real time, is already pulling comparable attention in specific markets and outperforming Gauff in raw engagement metrics within Southeast Asia. That is a significant sentence. The ranking gap between them is real. Gauff is a Grand Slam champion and a top 10 player, but the viewership surge around is not behaving like the viewership surge of a player ranked 31st. It's behaving like something bigger. And the sports establishment is starting to recognize that the usual logic of rankings equaling influence isn't fully holding in her case. What does this mean for where Eala goes from here? The trajectory is genuinely exciting, and the experts know it. She's 21. She's rising in the rankings at exactly the moment her cultural profile is exploding. The physical and technical development of a player at 21 still has enormous room to grow. If the on-court results continue to trend upward, more deep runs at major events, more wins over top 10 players, the kind of consistency that converts a ranking of 31 into a ranking of 15 or 10. The combination of performance and influence would create something the women's game hasn't quite seen before. Not just a great player who has international fans, an athlete who functions as a movement backed by one of the most passionate sporting nations on the planet, performing at the highest level in an individual sport with global broadcast reach. The ceiling, as the experts keep saying, is very high. And right now, in early 2026, the floor is already impressive enough to make tournament directors rearrange their logistics and former champions reach for boxing comparisons just to find language that fits. That is not a situation any serious tennis observer saw coming 2 years ago, and it is very much the situation they are looking at now. Alexa is not just a tennis story anymore. She is a viewership story, a cultural story, and apparently a crowd management problem, which is the best kind of problem to be. If you want more breakdowns like this on the players actually moving the needle in tennis right now, hit like and subscribe. There is a lot more.